Welcome everybody. This is the first talk of this coastal zone risk mitigation and management working group of the AOGS, Asia Oceania Geophysical Society, which has a subcommittee called Regional Advisory Committee, which we belong to. And the Regional Advisory Committee is the purpose of setting up by AOGS is to trying to encourage to promote the participation of scientists from researchers from the Asian country, ASEAN, and also from India also, because they are actually the main component of the AOGS. So the way to promote the participation, also including attending the annual meeting. This time, actually the first week in Singapore this year, next year will still be in Singapore, is to, we hope that, for instance, with this working group, the members could discuss among themselves, find interesting things to work together. At the same time, if they could also come up with the idea of proposing some sessions, right? Some sessions to be held, to be organized at the annual meeting. Besides that, they could also organize a satellite meeting in one of the countries, or they could be topical in nature, small in size, but they refer to the subject matter. Besides the coastal zone working group, we also have another working group. We call it low latitude ionosphere research, because the Asian countries just so happen that the area that is located at the low latitude, and whereas the ionospheric phenomenon is very interesting and a very active area of research. So we have this second working group. But anyway, we're happy to start the first talk by Professor Hsiao-Wen Wang. But you are the chairman, right? Chairperson of the hydraulic engineering.
No, I'm not. I'm not I'm the director of the Disaster Prevention Research Center of NCKU, but not the chairperson of the department.
All right, but you're the director you are the dean of the International Cooperation.
The vice president for international affairs. Yes.
Yeah, and we hope that with the participation of everybody, some regional and international cooperation could be established. But I would let Dr. Prasan Goswami, because he is the moderator, to introduce Professor Wang. And Dr. Goswami, he will be giving the next talk in next month. But I think that let him do the moderation first. Dr. Goswami, are you there? He was there. Dr. Goswami, can you come online? I think there's some problem. Then let me then start just say a few words about Professor Wang. And as you have heard now, she is the director of the what's that? Coastal
Disaster Prevention Research Center.
Right. So we have now a mini disaster at hand. Our moderator is gone. I just wanted. I think she will describe her university to you and her institute to you. And let's do it this way. I mean, let's do it this way. Let's let Professor Wang start the talk first, right?
Sure, and I can also introduce myself a little bit during my talk.
Please, yes.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Well, thank you again. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and also good morning and good evening for those of you who are not in the same time zone. I don't know if we have any, but just welcome and thank you. And again, I would like to thank Professor Ip for his invitation. I feel so honored to be presenting in this inaugural seminar, and that we can share our a little bit of experiences from Taiwan. And so a little bit about me. My area of training is hydraulic engineering. It was about like 14 years ago that I had a great opportunity to work on saving and restoring the habitat for an endangered species, black-faced spoonbill. And that was the time that I started to work with people from geomorphology, ecology, spatial planning, and also landscape architecture, etc. And I see the beauty and power of the interdisciplinary work. And so, I mean, since then, I a little bit shift my research focus from a relatively traditional hydraulic or ocean or coastal engineering to a more addressing the environmental problems and issues that would require the interdisciplinary work. So today, what I'm going to share with you in a way, hopefully, that we can encourage some of the collaboration is residual risk management. This is actually an ongoing research with a funded project by the Belmont Forum. And we work internationally. So hopefully some of our preliminary lessons learned can be some good starting points. Well, a little bit more about me, but as we kind of like just introduce, so I'm very honored, well, to join the strong team of the Department of Hydraulic and Ocean Engineering, well, about like 14, 15 years ago. And now I work in our Office of International Affairs and also have honor to work with a great team to deal with the disaster mitigation, prevention, and also the education. And well, as Professor Ip suggests, I think one of the main purposes of having this monthly webinar or seminar is to gather together everyone and that we come up with, well, our common interests that we would like to work together. So I would like to share with you a little bit about the coastal environment and the challenges and issues we're facing here. So everybody knows that coastal areas play a vital role, and about 1/4 of the world's population live in the coastal area, and the number is increasingly, increasing rapidly. And we all know that, well, most of the world's largest cities are located at the coast. And for sure, we have many critical infrastructures in the coastal area. And coastal areas are also important and productive ecosystems. So on your right, you see that here's Taiwan, and we do have the sandy beach, wetland, rock, coral reef, cliff, etc. along our coast. And in terms of the human activities in coastal areas, Taiwan is one of the largest fishing industries in the world. And as you see the map on the right, over 300 fishing harbors along our coastline. And in the recent years, because of the new energy policy, we are promoting the renewable energy development, and that refers mostly to the offshore wind farm and also the large scale and the ground-mounted solar in the coastal area or some of the, well, so-called abandoned land. And so which might bring up many complicated issues that how we can manage the different uses and while we consider the threats from the different hazards. So a bit of the characteristics about Taiwan. Well, one of my very close friend and colleague from UC Berkeley, he once said that, because he's a geomorphologist, and he once said that to a geomorphologist, Taiwan is a Disneyland because everything is happening so quickly, everything is exciting. Meaning that, well, Taiwan is young, we are still uplifting, we are not stable, well, in terms of the environment. And so we have the very high precipitation and typhoons, earthquakes. And as you see on your right, we do have very high variability in hydrology. For instance, in the southern Taiwan, well, 89%, almost 90% of the annual precipitation will concentrate in the summer months. making, well, the water resources management or in planning very difficult. And on your left, you see this is the data from the Water Resources Agency, the highest level of the authority in Taiwan dealing with flood and water resources. So you see that we do experience the more frequent extreme events, no matter it's flood or drought. We are having more frequent and more extreme events as shown here. So we are seeing the evidence of climate change in Taiwan. Well, as I mentioned, typhoon, we encounter typhoon like 3.5 times per year, but in the recent years, it's already like 5.5 times. Well, it's one of the main threats, and which will bring heavy rain, extreme waves, high sea level, high sea water, storm surge, and strong wind. And this is not yet taking into account the impact of climate change, like sea level rise, etc. So one of the example from the Typhoon Morak back in 2009, that is one of the most devastating typhoon, the pretty much low probability and high consequence events in Taiwan. So in a mountainous area on your right, you see that because of the compound disaster, how we call it, because it refers to not only one type of disaster, flooding, it also refers to the landslide, mudslide, and debris flow all together. So we have, well, a few hundred deaths. And for the coastal area, as you see on your left, well, the flooding is very serious. And in some areas where we have the land subsidence, things can be very complicated. So as I said, the land subsidence is also one of the main challenge in Taiwan coastal area. So the two photos on your right basically show that, well, the photos that we took like 10 years ago in Jiayi County, very close to where NCKU is. So in some area, we could have like a land subsidence up to like 50 centimeter. So making these areas, they don't have to wait for typhoon. Even during the high tide, well, the villages can just be flooded. So it's very challenging. And on your left, you also see that, as I said, Taiwan is dynamic. Things are happening very quickly, and we are still uplifting, and island is still uplifting. So our sediment yield is very high. So according to Dyson 2003, well, Taiwan is such a tiny land, so we are only like a 0.024% of the world's entire land area, but we contribute about 2% of the world's total of the suspended sediment per year to the ocean. So we are contributing sediment a lot. We produce sediment a lot, we transport a lot, and we contribute the sediment to the ocean a lot. But the thing is that because of the different reservoirs, weirs, infrastructures that we build for the water supply. So for instance, the 61 major reservoirs in Taiwan impound a total of 2.2 billion of cubic meter of sediment, meaning that, well, downstream area, we experience hungry water where we don't have sufficient sediment supply. And in the coastal area, we have the coastal erosion, and our barrier islands are like retreating and shrinking. So these are also our other challenges. So we also acknowledge that the coastal areas, as I said, is important and productive ecosystems. We do have abundant natural resources along the coast. And this is one of our earlier work that we try to map out the various values in, well, the Qigu area in Tainan coast, where NCKU is very close to. So we see, well, we have like the Sopian wetland, which supports different kinds of the species, birds, fish, etc., and also the fishing industry, and also the seafood, and also the Seoul Mountain as a legacy of the Seoul industry in the past decades, and also in some area where the recreational purposes or the services, for instance, the lagoon boat tour, is there. So with that various values and productive ecosystem, people actually benefit a lot from our ecosystem. But in our experiences, we do see that the ecosystem services are something relatively ignored by different people. So that's why in the recent years, our government, as well as the academia altogether, try to promote so-called the MBS, try to acknowledge the importance of the ecosystem services. And in the way that we work with our environments, we try to adopt the natural-based solution in dealing with the environmental issues. And also, well, the example from Qigou, the same area, that in a few years ago, we tried to map out the different ecosystem services this area can support and provide. And you see here, we do have a few proposed solar ground-mounted large-scale solar development in this area. Well, again, which might be very complicated, but as you see that this is area where we support important and very valuable ecosystems, but we also need to have such like solar development to support our green energy policy. But this is not something that I would like to focus today, but I'm happy to discuss further if we have some other good time. Okay, so with all these different issues and the challenges we are facing here, we are proud to say that in Taiwan, we do have a few universities and institutions focus a lot on the coastal ocean related issues. So, and here together with some of my colleagues, I believe, from National Cheng Kung University, we are located in Tainan. And we do mostly coastal engineering, but a small group of people also address the ocean science. But we are proud to say that National Cheng Kung University is one of the top comprehensive universities in Taiwan. In terms of the comprehensive, we have like 10 different colleges. And here, the listed departments here basically are from, well, the College of Sciences, College of Engineering, and College of Wildlife Science, and College of Social Science, etc. So all these like interdisciplinary efforts are using different lanes from different angles and perspectives to address the very complicated issues in the coastal zones we are facing. At NCKU, we also have some very strong team forming the different research centers. So as Professor Ip mentioned in the very beginning, well, I'm now the director of the Disaster Prevention Research Center, and I believe the director of the Coastal Ocean Monitoring Center, Professor Dong, is also joining the talk today. And also, I believe we have the director of the Research Center for Water Science and Technology, Professor Chen, is also joining today. But basically, NCKU is a strong team ranging from like the different disciplines working together on a very complicated issue. So what are the issues we work on? Well, ranging from like natural hazard mitigation, disaster management, risk assessment, well, to the marine affairs management, wave dynamics or renewable energy, planning, management, engineering. I think all these are kind of like, well, interconnected with each other. So these are some of the highlights showing, well, what the research areas we work here at NCKU. And I also want to highlight that at NCKU, we have a strong capacity in terms of the research equipment. So for instance, in our Tainan hydraulic lab, we have the super tank, which is about 300 meter long, which is very rare around the world. And we also have, well, our flume lab, which is just right here in our department. And we also have the wave basin. And also at the COMC, the Coastal Ocean Monitoring Center, where Professor Dong is leading. So they are setting up the ocean monitoring network using the coastal weather station, tidal station, as well as the marine data buoy to collect the important information, not only in Taiwan, but also in this region. So the information, the data we collect by the different means are something very useful for us to further come up with the plan or the policy implication for the coastal management. And one thing I also want to highlight that NCKU, started the CZWG, stands for the President's Forum of Southeast and South Asia and Taiwan Universities. So this is a platform that 107 member universities from the Asian countries join. And we meet together every year at the different occasions. For instance, we just had a local chapter, which we organized in Indonesia. So the CZWG is a platform that people from the member universities discuss the regional challenges, how we can tackle from the academia collaboration or the academia industrial collaboration, etc. But also, we are one of the members of the Worldwide Universities Network, where we work with other universities across the 5 continents, also to address the issues such as responding to climate change and public and higher education and public health, etc. So I hope if you are from the institution, well, happening to be in the CZWG platform or the WN, I think we have more resources that we can collaborate further. So I hope I didn't spend too much time talking about the coastal issues in Taiwan and NCKU. I did it in a way, hopefully you can be more interested in understanding us and seeking together the possibility working together. And now to talk about the topic residual risk, I would like to share a bit of the history or the evolution of the flood management in Taiwan and specifically in the coastal area. So as I shared in the previous slides, that we encounter frequent typhoons. And it was like not until 2000 that we had our Disaster Prevention and Response Act became effective. So from the legal perspective, we have something to support, well, the mitigation and the management and the response for sure of different types of the disasters. And in terms of the flood, well, starting from 1999, we have the flood inundation maps. That is, well, required, especially, I mean, in the recent years, that each county will need to have a flood inundation maps to inform, well, the response strategies and where the flood prone area is and where should be budget allocated first, etc. In the flood inundation maps, we actually went through some of the improvements. And in the 3rd generation, we even have it open to the public. And before it can be public, we welcome the feedback and the local experiences to kind of like update or correct the outcome from the numerical simulation. And on top of the flood inundation maps, we also have the capacity building programs. Basically, we know that in terms of the flood management, well, the front line, well, the community will be the first to be impacted. So from the central government to the county to towns, and also to community, through this capacity building programs, we had different kind of the drills, exercises, education, informing task teams, etc., to allow our different levels of government to know how to respond when the disaster happens. And also for some of the, well, flood-prone areas, flood-prone communities, we have the flood-resistant communities initiative, which more resources will be allocated for those areas, for those communities, for them to prepare themselves and for them to have the government to have more engineering-oriented strategies as the top priority. So on top of this, some of the related acts we have include the Special Planning Act, Wetland Conservation Act, and the Coastal Zone Management Act. And I would say the Coastal Zone Management Act is one of the most relevant to the issues that we're discussing here. So let me spend a few minutes to talk about the Coastal Zone Management Act. So under the Coastal Zone Management Act, the Coastal Zone Management Plan has to be kind of like claim and be public. And by identifying the different issues and challenges that we have For instance, the degradation of coastal ecosystems and habitats and landscapes. And also we are lacking of the long-term monitoring or effective measures to classify and zone our different areas. And as well as that we need to have a prospective strategy to tackle climate change, etc. So it requires that 3 types of zones should be identified. The first is the coastal conservation zone, where we have like the national parks or the ecological values are high, or where we support the endangered species, etc. So that is the coastal conservation zones. And another type is the coastal protection zones. And so this is highly relevant to the different hazard or disasters that we are dealing with. And also we have the specific zone as the third type, meaning that if for some areas that we do want to have more regulated or appropriate, for instance, the governance structure or development, so the specific zones can be identified. But if we talk about floods, the coastal protection zones is one of the most relevant. So the coastal protection zone also requires a coastal protection plans. So there are 5 different hazards identified in this coastal protection plans, coastal protection zones that include sea level rise, coastal erosion, and then subsidence, as well as the storm surge and the tsunami. And because the tsunami is something that we have the low probability, relatively low probability here, and the sea level rise is something that we are still hoping to have some of the academic or scientific evidence that can reach some kind of agreement. So now in the coastal protection zone, we take into account the coastal erosion, then subsidence, and the storm surge. And if one or more hazard is high risk, or 2 or more hazards are mid-risk, the area should be identified as the level 1 coast protection zone, which means like the first level, more higher authority and more resources should be allocated. And if not, it's the level 2 coastal protection zone, where the county government can be managed, can be just managing these areas. So some of the examples, the coastal protection zones concerning the various hazards. If it's storm surge, I mean, this is the same area that I showed you earlier in the Chigu area where NCKU is very close to. So this is an area where the storm surge risk is very high, and also a bit of the coastal erosion. And we are okay in terms of the land subsidence compared to, well, the Jiayi County or some other areas. But still, all the Tainan city, I mean, the coastal zone in Tainan city is recognized as the level 1 coastal protection zone. And the complication, one of the complications that we are facing, even we are recognized as the level 1 coastal protection zone. In this area, there are various authorities dealing with different zoning. For instance, I mentioned that we have the Wetland Conservation Act, which require a wetland conservation and utilization plan in this area. And we also have the scenic area, well, focusing more on the recreation, etc. So there's also the corresponding zoning. And we also have the Taijiang National Park in this area. So, well, the different zoning will be kind of like the, well, designed for the national park management. So that's why I say we try to move forward, and we do have an integrated coastal management plan already, which is good, advancing. But we are now still working on dealing with the various zones, plans, sometimes seeming conflicting with each other, but at least we now bring everyone, I mean, all the stakeholders together to start to discuss the strategies and the adaptation to the climate change. And one pressure I believe many of your countries also experience is the development pressure. So in Chigu area, the same area that I show, that well, in the past 20, 30 years, we had like industrial zone kind of like proposed, which was named kind of like disapproved. Lucky to this area, otherwise we wouldn't have the lagoon or the sandbar, such a beautiful and productive ecosystems as they are now. But there are again like various attempts for the development. And also, as I mentioned, in the recent green energy policy, we want to have the wind farm, offshore wind farm, and also the ground-mounted solar development. So some of the proposed solar plants would just like in, for instance, the black-faced spoonbill hotspots, the habitats. And so some of the conflicts occur. So again, we are dealing with a very complicated issue, but this is something where we see we need to kind of like contribute ourselves to the topic, which is the residual risk. So again, in the history and the evolution of the flood management in Taiwan that I just shared with you, so we have like different acts became effective, which help us to bring everybody together to discuss the very complicated issue. So we rely on some of the tools like the maps, engineering-oriented strategies, but we focus more on the risk communication, capacity building programs, and community level efforts as well. But still, we see the different interests in this area. So how, well, especially under the threat of the climate change, that we have increasing risk to deal with the residual risk. I'm not sure if you know or experience the idea of the residual risk, but let me just explain a little bit. So this is a drawing from LUDI 2012. So basically it shows that the area protected by the flood protection, well, dikes, levees, or any other like the flood protection work. And the residual risk is that the risk from floods that is greater than the design standard of the flood protection work. So if you might know that the Hurricane Katrina back in 2005 in New Orleans in the US, one of the main challenges or the main kind of like problems was like the residual risk, or we call it like levee effect in some areas, because people who live, well, behind the levee think the area they live are safe. So again, this is we call residual risk. So some of more conceptual diagram for you to better understand. But in this Belmont Forum funded project, we have the residual risk of extreme floods, red flood project, that we try to help our communities to design a more resilient strategy by a framework that we all together are creating. And in terms of we are talking about National Cheng Kung University from Taiwan and UC Berkeley from the US, and also the TU HH from Germany, and also my colleagues from France and Vietnam. So we try to create an international network of experts. So it could be people from academia, it could be managers, practitioners, that we want to, well, be together and to address this residual risk dilemma. So let me show you more of the diagrams to make sure we understand this challenge. So if I use like the flood insurance rate map in the US as an example. So in the US, in terms of the 100-year firm regulatory map, once the levee is built, there are some kind of like measures to be taken into account. For instance, so this is a FEMA accredited levee, and Bill lives here. And here is where Bob lives. So for Bill, because he is protected by the levee, So he is only applied to, well, local emergency plans. But for Bob, because he lives in an area where risks are high and no protection, so he has to buy the flood insurance, and the building restrictions in this area are applied. And there are building codes and local emergency plans, and also risk communication, well, is applied to him because he is aware of the risk. So Bill then will feel safe. I think it's because of, well, he lives behind the levee. But once there is an event exceeding the design standard, well, if it's like a 200-year, which would be happening very likely because of the climate change, again, more frequent and more extreme event, then there's a misperception and a mispreparation, and Bill would not be safe anymore. But because he doesn't have the flood insurance and he is not aware of the risk, so a lot of kind of the problems would just occur. So in our funded project, Belmont Forum project, so we try to understand how the regulatory flood maps help these countries, well, either to control the developments in the high-risk zones, or how these maps are used to inform the residual risk, or if the land use planning is taken into account. So we cover different aspects from the planning perspective, the social representation, and the knowledge. So some of our results so far, so for instance, in the US and in France, for instance, there are huge differences in the way how US and France map and manage the residual risk behind levees. For instance, in the US, so we do see there are different zones. So this is the regulatory floodway. And then they have the zone AE, which means that the insurance obligated. And for zone X, which is the orange zone, some area like this, so the insurance recommended, but and developments allowed. And for this, like the shaded, well, zone X, also insurance recommended, but the developments allowed. And in France, well, on the other hand, you see that, well, they also have the different zones. But here is the zone they call security band, meaning that they recognize the area of potential levee overtopping or breach. Even it's protected by the levee, but they know there's a potential of the levee breach or overtopping. So this is the area where no developments are allowed. And for this like a pink red zone, so meaning that rural areas and urban areas with high hazard intensity. So again, no developments allowed. And for this like blue zones, which is like the urban areas with medium hazard, so some developments can be allowed, etc. So we do see that in France, it has a more top-down approach and designates the area behind levees as part of the regulatory flood-prone area and mandatory land use, planning, building codes, emergency measures, and the risk communication. But the US, well, not the case. But we do see now increasing risk communication and the emergency preparedness measures and the flood insurance. Some of the areas are not mandatory, but recommended. So what about Taiwan? So in Taiwan, as I mentioned, we have the flood inundation maps. And here are some of the results from our different kind of like flood inundation maps resulted from different scenarios. But one thing that we figure is that so far the flood inundation maps haven't considered the climate change that much. We know that more extreme, more frequent, but in our flood inundation maps, we do not discuss that heavily enough. And also one issue is that, well, the locals will still have difficulty in comprehending the maps. But even though the flood inundation maps, as I say, went through the different improvements in the 3 generations, it is a very helpful tool for the budget allocation and for identifying the communities where more resources should be kind of like inputs, etc. And also it provides a way that locals can discuss with the academia and the government about their experiences and increasing the risk perception and also the risk communication. And as I briefly mentioned that, well, still the flood mitigation measures are, well, in the past, I would say 20 years ago, focused more on the engineering oriented measures. So a lot of money spent on enlarging the flood conveyance capacity or raising levee height and pumping stations, etc. And these measures for sure help. But as we said, that flood risk has to be better communicated, as we do in those like a flood resilient community initiative or capacity building program. And one thing very different from France or the US, because they talk about a lot on the levee bridge or levee overtopping, which is more external water, we call 外水. But here in Taiwan, after the Typhoon Morak in 2009, we still encounter some of the, well, floods, but mainly due to, well, we call like the 内水, inner water, which means that, well, our drainage system is not like strong enough to drain out the water in time or in, well, in a sufficient manner. So we do have like the overland flow water, we call it caused by the inner water. But we do have the compensation plan where kind of like if the places have the ponding exceeding 50 centimeter, the compensation can be applied. So then we try to understand, as I said, that if we can incorporate the climate change more in our flood inundation maps, it could be very helpful, especially due to the capacity building program. We've already got a few hundred communities around the island joined already, which enhance their capacity in planning, dissemination, and the mapping. And but from some of our in-depth interviews with some of the local government or the academia or the central government, we do see that the term of the residual risk is not used that much. And people still see the improvements to be made for our flood inundation maps. And some of the difficulty for the local government that they are so acknowledge the living with water idea or the flood resilience idea, but because probably of the election culture, etc., they are asked to have no floods. And so it also highlights that there's a gap between the risk assessment and really understanding risk. And also people all agree that we do have our National Land Planning Act, but our National Land Planning is not well enough addressing the flood management, which means, as I said, the building restrictions or the building codes are not there yet that much. So with some of these lessons learned, let me show you two examples. So this is Zhengwen River, one of the very coastal section, the river section in the coastal area in Tainan. So we see that we have the highway there and the channel width, river width, and 7.4 meter high levee, which is designed for a 100-year flood. And in terms of the levee, let me show you this. So in Taiwan, we design our levee to tackle the 100-year flood for the Zhengwen River. So we do have different levels, but for the Zhengwen River, a 100-year flood is the design standard. And that will also require another like 1.5 meter for like safety margin. So that's why the levee height is like that. But if we try to compare this section with the US and the French example, we do have the regulatory floodway, as you see here. And we also have some of the farms and fish ponds, they are registered, but in the floodway. And in the flood-prone area, well, we only have, as I said, the community, the flood-resistant community initiative, which encourage those flood-prone communities to join to have more resources and to prepare better before the floods come or disaster come, and have the response plan to be ready before the floods. But they are not like required or asked to do any flood insurance, no building restrictions, and no building codes, etc. And if we see another example in the Qingkunshan community, also in Tainan, and here is the community. It's an aging community just close to the ocean, to the sea. So you see there are few soap-pan wetland, just like what I kind of like show in the very beginning slides. So this area also is protected by a levee, which is 4.7 meter high and 50-year protection. And so in terms of these kind of the sea dike, well, on top of the 50-year storm surge as the design standard, the wave height, breaker height, and to come up with the like runoff has also been considered. And also there's some certain of the overtopping allowed. So this is how this area is designed for their levee. But again, like this is the flood prone area. So they seem to be protected by the levee, but that's only for 50-year storm surge. Once the events exceeding the protection level, now the Water Resources Agency also promotes other measures, very forward thinking. For instance, to use fish ponds or farms as the detention area on some of the private land. And for some of the public land, for instance, the SOPIM, as I say, one of the ecosystem services that the people can benefit from is the regulating, well, the hazard regulation or flood regulation is one of the benefits. So also from the public land, the runoff allocation. But the area, the people who live in the area, they are fully aware for sure the risk they are facing and they will be experienced. But still, if similar to France, if we can have more top-down strategies or policies, that's something that we try to work on to see if it can be something applied in Taiwan. So we also compare the different flood risk management tools with US, France, and Canada, Quebec, and with Taiwan. So you see that, well, we all the areas, all the countries use the flood maps. It's called flood insurance rate maps in US, called flood risk prevention maps in France, and flood zone maps in Quebec, and flood inundation maps in Taiwan. And flood insurance is recommended in the US, and it's universal in France, and not applied, well, but only a financial program exists for Quebec. And like in Taiwan, only a flood compensation system exists. And there's not a national-wide flood insurance program. And for the land use restrictions, well, for France and Quebec, it's mandatory, but in Taiwan, not required, in the US, not required, and that's the same for the building code requirements. And in terms of the emergency preparedness tools, I would say that Taiwan is doing this quite well. And we do have the flood warning system, and with the IoT and the advanced technology, we're doing quite well. And we also have very matured local emergency plan. And that's pretty much similar case for some of the other countries. And for the risk communication to the citizens, so again, it's mandatory for France and Quebec because of the very top-down approach. And for Taiwan, we do have many bottom-up program and initiative in the past decade, which helps a lot. And in the US, pretty much voluntary. So with this comparison study, learning from each other, and we're happy to have some of the take-home message. And I hope this can be also the take-home message to summarize my talk today and to encourage more international collaboration. One thing is that, well, we understand because of the climate change, the extreme flood happened, but there is still a general false sense of security that floods can be prevented. And so that's why we see the residual risk of the extreme floods is still, well, ignored, and we need to do more. And so all the countries that we kind of like compare with each other, we use the maps to inform as a tool for management in similar or same science, but the assumptions or the policy application so different. So how we can do better, how we can incorporate the climate change in our policy are still something that we are working hard now. So I put 2 area photos here. Well, this is also the Chigu area as I show. This is what it is now here. So with the sea level rise, with everything is becoming more extreme. Well, 50 years later, will we have an area like this? So NCKU will be just inundated? Well, we don't know, but we have to act now to think about a more like a forward-thinking response plan and to incorporate the lessons that we learned well from the past. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention, and hopefully we can have some discussion. Thank you.
Hi, Professor Hsiao-Wen. Yeah, it's an excellent talk. Yeah, this is Prashun Goswami. Yeah, and now the session is open for questions. So, yeah, questions can be posted over the chat box provided. So, I think, yeah, there is a first question that comes from the chat, Constance Chow. So, thank you, Professor Wang, for your interesting talk. So, according to her, I would like to ask perhaps sensitive questions, but is flood insurance common in Taiwan? So this is her question. Is there a percentage which will be covered by the flood compensation system, or are flood losses usually covered by the individual's private insurances? So this is the direct questions to you.
Yes, well, thank you, Constance, for your brilliant question. So, well, unfortunately, in Taiwan, flood insurance is not common at all. Well, as I say that we now only have a well-established compensation system that if you have your house, your area having the inundation exceeding 50 centimeter, well, you can apply for the compensation, but there's no insurance yet. Well, a few years ago, I mean, right after the Typhoon Morak, there was a discussion, heavy discussion or debate going on in Taiwan because not only floods, we also have like well, landslides, debris flow, other types of the disasters. And we started to talk about if we should have, we call it like a, well, high consequence or the huge disaster, insurance program. But because of the insurance rate map is so difficult for us to come up. And so that's why it's still under discussion. So there's not something nationwide. And so that's why I would say we don't see any like conflicting between or the national system and private insurance because there's no such a national insurance program exists. I hope that can answer your question.
Yeah, and now the second question comes from Kiran Kumar Reddy. He's asking about, as urbanization may not be avoided, what are your suggestions to justify both?
Yeah, it's another very good question. Well, again, well, urbanization, well, it's just like, well, happening more. This is the trend we see. So I would say the risk communication or enhancing the risk perception is a must, very important. Because from the maps that I share in the US, I mean, you still remember Bill and Bob, right? Well, Bill has no sense of what kind of the risks he is facing. So if the flood, the risk communication or the risk perception can be enhanced, the mispreparation or the misperception will be reduced in a way that people can prepare better. Because as we see that urbanization may not be avoided, and the extreme events is no way that we can kind of like avoid. So we have to enhance our preparedness, our preparation to the disasters, to the flood. So that's what I would respond.
Okay. And the third question comes from Dr. Janita. In the preparation of mitigation plan, like the levies, is socioeconomic vulnerability analysis also included?
Yeah, well, all are the very great questions. Yes, in terms of the risk, we talk about exposure, we talk about hazard, and we also talk about vulnerability. So vulnerability includes for sure the social economy. And I show you very quickly, briefly, in one of the slides that delineating the research areas that NCKU is working on. So one of my colleagues, I believe Professor Wu is also here. And Professor Wu, Professor Xiao and their team work with Water Resources Agency to come up with the risk assessment along the coast. And yes, the social economy vulnerability analysis is included in their risk assessment. But now, the preparation of the mitigation plan, for instance, one of the community who joined the flood resistance community initiative, they actually have a special arrangement for the elderly and disabled people. So that's why I would say, yes, it's included.
Okay. Yeah, I think that answered your questions, I believe. And I have a question that how you are communicating your research to the terminal people, that means the coastal people, how you are educating them?
Yeah, so Dr. Goswami, because I'm not sure if I hear you clearly because the signals were not so good.
Yeah.
Talking. Yeah.
What I'm asking is how you are communicating your science to the coastal people or to the vulnerable people.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So yeah, one thing is that well, I think the language is very important. So if it's very scientific language, I don't think the ordinary or local people will understand at all. Even the government, sometimes we figure that we should use some of the language or even the concept they could understand or they could buy it. So it takes time for sure. So to the community, we actually have different materials derived from our scientific results. But I think, again, it just takes time. It takes a lot of like back and forth conversation, workshops, discussion to really communicate the idea and make sure the idea is communicated and received. But I do see that, well, the education is very important. So in terms of the education, I'm not only talking about the education to the public, but the education to our professionals and the experts or the governments. As one of the kind of like interviewee that we had, so pretty much said that we are asked not to have floods. Well, I think that's their pressure. But how we can make it more a policy-oriented message that the government know the flood is allowed. But the thing is that if we prepare enough, but again, it takes time. So, but I would say, yeah, it's already starting. Hopefully that I can, well, sometime later to share with you some of good experiences.
Okay. Okay. The next questions comes from Francisco Multeni. So thank you very much for your talk. I would like to ask a question about the uplift that you mentioned. And earthquakes can generate large cosmic displacement, but you only mentioned about the subsidence that I can imagine that is due to sedimentation charge coming from the rivers or also from the earthquakes. What is the uplifting rate that you have along Taiwan? In the coastal area, how large seismic displacement can be?
Thank you. I think I can probably only answer part of the questions, but again, you know that Taiwan is in the intersection of the different plates. So because of the intersection, being in the intersection, so that's why we still have like the movements and uplifting of the entire island. And so, well, earthquake for sure, it caused like a seismic displacement, etc. But the land subsidence that I mentioned mostly are happening in our coastal area, southwestern coast of Taiwan, mainly resulted from the overpumping of groundwater. So because a lot of fish farms and other uses, etc. So the groundwater is pumped well in the last decades. Because of the overpumping, so the land is subsiding. So that's the main reason causing the land subsidence. But true, yes, because of the uplifting, we produce a lot of sediment yield is high, and we still have the sedimentation, sediment transport and the sedimentation, the position in the coastal area. But because of, again, like the reservoirs, weirs, pretty much impounding a lot of the sediment. So that's why in the downstream area, some of the areas, we have the insufficient sediment supply, and plus the land subsidence, the flood threat, flood concern is even higher. But in the mountainous area, again, like the uplifting and seismic motions, etc., causing another set of series of problems. So I hope that, if you are interested, I love to share with you some of our earlier studies and ongoing studies about all this movement, etc.
Yeah, I think there is no further questions. Okay, it's just a small announcement. If you are interested in receiving more information and newsletter from AOGS-RAC, please write to us, as well as visit the AOGS-RAC website. You can find it in the chat box. Yeah, I think, yeah. If you have any further questions, you can just put it in the chat box.
If there's still some time, some minute, I would like to ask some of our working group members to comment. I can see that Sylvia, are you there? Sylvia Allen from New Zealand.
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
Yeah, would you like to say something? You know, you're a great expert on this kind of things. Yeah, you open. Yeah, right, Sylvia. Nice to see you. Yes.
Hello. I really enjoyed that talk. Thank you very much. Here we have a lot of the same issues. So I'm looking forward to more of these sorts of discussions. Very good. Thank you.
So we'll ask you to say something next time, Sylvia, I tell you. Yeah. And Constance, Dr. Chu.
Yeah, I'm here. No, I don't really have. I already asked the question I wanted to ask for, yeah, the Prof. Wang on the flood insurance, because I think flood insurance is one of the conflicting issues in any national policy. It seems to differ from country to country, and I know that many countries in Asia, most people would not have private insurance just for flood. So I was curious, but I know that increasingly this would be an issue with, like you say, rising sea levels. Yeah. So even in Singapore, we have no flood insurance in place because nobody expects floods at all in this country. But now that we have more rains and heavier storms, they're trying to build up more barriers. So they never thought about like placing the responsibility on the individual, and the individuals in the country would expect that the government would do something about it. So I'm just thinking whether this is actually typically what we would expect in Asia.
Yeah, that's true. It would just differ country from country, but thank you for the information about Singapore.
Yeah.
I see a Dr. Pan from Vietnam National University. Would you like to say something or turn on your camera so that we could meet you?
Hello, Professor Ip, and thanks, Professor Wang, for your interesting talk. Unfortunately, I went out for some time, so sorry, I missed a major part of the talk. So I need to rewatch from the recording. So later, so I will send you a question if I have any. Sorry about that. But again, thanks for your for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So there's a warning to our audience not to take a break now automatically. I request you. Okay, go back to Dr. Goswami. Pasam, yeah, here is yours. Yeah. I mean, if you want to finish the talk, and that's fine. Yeah.
I think there is no further questions in the chat box. Yeah. So I think we can conclude the session over here. Professor IP. Yeah. So thank you very much, Professor Wang. So it was an excellent talk, and we really appreciate your lot of effort you put for the talk and the great work you are doing. So it's really open up lots of collaboration opportunities in the future within the group as well as with other people. So we really look forward to work with you as well as other group members. Yeah, thank you. And thank you all. Yeah, and thank you all the members for posting your questions over here. Yeah, Professor Wing.
Yes, thank you. And then I should also tell people that you're the one to give the next talk, right?
Yes.
So we should prepare for questions for you already.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. See you next month. We will make the announcement. So please watch out for the announcement. Yeah. It's August. What's that? What was the date? I think it's August 24, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So see you then. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Wang. Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.